Thanks, Josh, and hello to everybody. We are going to run this as a work session, so we're going to go ahead and take roll call from our board of directors. I'll start first with Mr. Arns. Mr. Brown.
Present.
Ms. Harvey. I've got her as absent. Ms. Johnson is excused tonight. Mr. Kenyon. No, Mr. Kenyon. Mr. Lance. No, Mr. Lance. Mr. Law. No, Mr. Law. Dr. Schaefer. No, Dr. Schaefer. Mr. Smith.
I will break your streak and say that I'm here.
Wonderful. Thanks. And Ms. Tomasi.
I'm here, Amy.
Thank you. And Ms. Thayer. And Ms. Thayer is excused. So Mr. Co-Chair, you do not have quorum of the board, and that is just fine because this is a work session. We are not doing any public business tonight. And as Mr. Dorrell mentioned, we are recording this meeting and we're not conducting public business and no decisions will be made, which is wonderful since there is no quorum. So please move forward.
Hey, Amy, thank you. And welcome, everyone. We're super excited to have this conversation. Appreciate you carving out a little time this evening to have this discussion. And I know we're all excited about the topics at hand and looking forward to the conversation. So with that, I'll move out of the way and hand it over to you, Josh, our CEO of the Wyoming Business Council, who will help facilitate the conversation and introduce us to the panel.
Well,
Thanks,
thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. And we do have a really good panel. I do want to mention one of our panelists is working to get in now. So we're going to stay tuned for him. Apparently they were doing some testing of the alarm system at the Capitol. And so he had to move. So looks like he's just now joining us. So that's perfect. That timing is everything. We'll go ahead and get started. As Mr. Co-Chair Eric Arns mentioned, my name is Josh Dorrell. I'm the CEO of the Wyoming Business Council. That's the state's economic development agency. We thought tonight would be a really good time to talk a little bit about the opportunities and some of the challenges that those opportunities face as we look at the state and as we look at some of the big opportunities that are ahead of us. We do believe that Wyoming is poised for some pretty good changes, and some things that are on the horizon are pretty exciting. But all of those things that we may need to think about some of the risks that are involved and how we do that calculus. If we could have all of the board members who are, you're in panelist mode right now, but if you could turn off your cameras, it may make it so that our panelists, our regular panelists, could be seen. Tonight with us, we have Rob Creager, who's the Executive Director of the Wyoming Energy Authority. We have Renny MacKay, who's the director of the Wyoming Business Alliance. We have Representative John Baer, who represents House District 31 and is the incoming House Chair of the Joint Appropriations Committee. Derek Smith, who's a Wyoming Business Council board member, as well as at Devon Energy. And then we have Patrick Collins, who is the mayor of Cheyenne. So we've got a pretty darn good panel here for you, and I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone. I'm going to start out with Mr. MacKay, and Renny, if you could tell us a little bit about what opportunity did you see that made you really interested in the role at the Wyoming Business Alliance, which is a fairly new role for you.
Thanks so much, Josh, and really honored to be on this panel. I was in the governor's office until April of this year. So changing roles was a big decision for me, and really believe in public service. And so was honored to do that work and work along great people in that position. And as you talk about the opportunity, I think it was a hard decision to leave that, but I really was excited by the chance to come do private sector work. And I think all of us on this panel, and as your members know, and come from that private sector background, your board members know, there's so much that is possible right now, and I think it is a really exciting moment for Wyoming. And the Business Alliance, to differentiate from the Business Council, we're a private sector, we're a member-driven organization, and we do advocacy and education around issues that help businesses grow. So a different role to advocate for my members and help them and their businesses expand and have more impact on their economies and their communities. So that was really exciting to me. And this, I was also knew that I would have the opportunity to continue to work on the complex challenges that exist out there for all of us who care about Wyoming and want to make it better, because there's no easy answers anywhere. It takes a lot of work to try to help any business grow. So many of them know exactly what it takes to hire the right people, to get people to come to their community when housing is in short supply, or to make sure that there's good educational systems out there so that the kids that are graduating from high schools are ready to work for their companies. So all of that was really exciting to me, and especially because I think Wyoming is poised to grow so much. So that's kind of the summary of it, and hope that helps.
Yeah. Thanks, Renny. And I agree. I think there are some complex challenges ahead of us, but there's a lot of that opportunity. And I think you kind of hit on some of the really big factors that the private industries are facing and looking at and how to solve those. Chairman Bear, I'm gonna go to you next and talk a little bit about the opportunity that you saw and kind of what has driven you to the position that you're in today.
Well, I'm just going to defer to the people being the reason I'm here where I'm at today. But, like Renny, I too feel compelled to serve my community and the state. And I think it's a great honor to do that. The fact that the people have elected me, a few times here to return and try to represent them in a way that maybe we haven't seen in a few decades as far as conservatism is concerned is very encouraging to me. And though I think the world is certainly heading in a different direction as far as the way our founding fathers originally set the nation up and led to the success that we all enjoy today. And I think that some of the directions that we have taken as a culture have led to a lot of challenges. And that is exactly why I believe the Wyoming Business Council and the Wyoming Business Alliance exist today, because challenges that we've encountered that maybe we wouldn't have really encountered 100 years ago. And I just believe in the concept that there's really nothing new under the sun, that there are a lot of very simple solutions to the problems that exist. And I feel that far too often we look to government for solutions. And so I am a staunch conservative in that I would like to see government smaller, and that's what I've always preached, and therefore there's a large contingency of people that support that thought. It does mean that some of the safety nets that our communities have become used to become at risk, if you will. The further you go away from big government, the riskier it is. But with those risks come rewards. And so I really appreciate being a part of this panel, because I think that type of thinking needs to be put out into the communities again and championed by some people so that we can really make great decisions. And I know that the people on this panel are very bright people, and the more we work together, the faster we can come up with those conclusions, those good decisions. And I'm looking forward to being part of that in the coming years in the Appropriations Committee. I think you're muted, Josh.
Sorry, thanks. Somebody had to do it tonight. I'm glad it was me. So thank you for those comments, Chairman. And thinking about that role of government, I think that's an area where we're really keen to understand how do we become as surgical as possible and fill in those gaps where it's necessary. and make sure that we're enabling those private, entities and private business and locals to do what they need to do and stay out of the way where it's possible. So I think that is a really important component. I think it's probably part of the ethos of Wyoming, and I think a lot of people really feel strongly about that. And so glad to have your perspectives here, and looking forward to hearing more. I'm gonna jump now to Mr. Smith. Board Member Smith, Derek, if you want to talk a little bit about, how did you get to the role you are in, and you don't have to mention any of your professors at school either.
Fair enough. Well, thank you, Josh. I think one of the biggest parts to me of ending up where I'm at, thinking of the business council and my current role with the board there and a couple other organizations, is a desire to really contribute and help the state and the people in it continue to grow, and our industries continue to grow towards a long-term success. Personally, in terms of younger generations, don't tend to see a lot of folks around my age group getting involved. I would say, Renny and Josh and I are at least close compatriots in terms of age, and it's kind of unusual to have this many of us in a room. And I think that's important. A lot of times the folks around our age are raising families and building careers and don't really have as much of a voice at the table. So that to me is why it was important to have the younger guy in the room to bring that perspective. And also, with the business council and, oil and gas and natural extraction industries aren't normally as thought of because of being so entrenched, almost even culturally, in Wyoming, that, the thought of oil and gas and coal and uranium, and we can keep going down the list, and Trona, they'll always be there. And in reality, there are things we can do to help with those industries. And in addition, as we've seen in some of our projects, leverage those into other sectors that really can expand just beyond natural extraction industries and into other markets as well with some assistance. So, and if nothing other than some creative thinking. So that's why I'm here right now. It doesn't have anything to do with the sales class at the University of Wyoming, but learned a lot, that's for sure.
Thanks, Derek. And hey, so you went to school, and your goal was to become a landman, right? That was something that was important to you, right?
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting timing. We of course didn't have the School of Energy Resources, and it was something that I found, of all things, as a summer job, and fell in love with the industry, fell in love with the work. And then the opportunity came around to combine that with the love of Wyoming that I found in college, not being originally from Wyoming, and kind of made the pieces fall into place to be able to continue to work here, and have been lucky enough to work pretty much over all four corners of the state at different points. And it's exciting. But yes, definitely went into that idea of being a landman and being involved through those roles in the communities, really finding myself drawn into economic development. Actually, of all things, first starting with our local Main Street program up here in Gillette, and just kind of building and continuing to go stages deeper into it.
All right, thank you. All right, Mr. Creager, let's talk a little bit about the opportunity that you saw. I think you had a pretty interesting perspective coming from the office that you were in, and then being able to move into the Energy Authority. Talk a little bit about the opportunities you see and what made you make that move.
Yeah, thanks, Josh, and thanks for having me. Yeah, like you mentioned, I worked in the governor's office. Prior to this role, I left about a year before Renny did. But really the opportunity I saw, and Derek kind of hit on this a little bit, I was born and raised in Casper, Wyoming. My mom was a landman for 25 years. And, if you're born and raised here, energy really is ingrained in almost everything you do. I mean, every community in this state has some sort of tentacle to the energy industry. And so when I saw this job open up, I really thought, what better way to, as the representative said too, to serve my state, but then to, move over here and try to help on the energy front. And I think when we get more into challenges and opportunities, a huge challenge I saw that I think is also our biggest opportunity is I often reflect on, 2001, about 30 states in this country, their top source of energy was coal. and that accounted for over 51% of the electricity generated in this country. That unfortunately is down to about 10 states and less than 15% of the power generation in this country. I don't think any of us on this call wanted that to happen, but that's really a big kind of sign to us that, hey, we need to innovate. We need to look at new ways to produce energy. And I'm excited to be at the forefront of that when it relates to coal or oil and gas or nuclear. You name all the energy sources we're working on. So really the huge opportunity I saw was, again, if we're going to move the needle forward in this state, our biggest industry is the best chance to do it. So saw that, threw my hat in the ring, and was selected. And it's been a great, year and a half. And we've done a lot at the WEA and partnered with all of you, and look forward to doing even more.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Hey, so speaking of that, you are traveling around a lot to kind of see what's going on recently in DC and now down in Texas to kind of continue to see what the landscape is. Any nuggets or any opportunities that you see coming? Obviously, in the next year or so, some pretty interesting changes are coming down the pike, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I won't sugarcoat it. The change in administrations out east is certainly going to make our lives easier. But I think a big piece to point at is we have, and what I see is this next 4 years is a huge opportunity to really pounce on what we can do, because who knows what happens 4 years after this. But even more importantly, look at the states that use our energy that might frankly have not gone for this incoming administration. How can we make sure they still use Wyoming energy? So that's an exciting piece. But yeah, I mean, you look at the appointments that are coming in from EPA to Interior to Energy. All of those nominees spell good things for Wyoming. They understand the West and what we deal with. So I will say on our litigation budget will be hopefully less, understanding the administration coming in. But I do see a lot of opportunities there, and we'll see. I know they're ready to rock and roll on the 20th, so it's an exciting time.
Great, thank you. Last but not least, Mayor Collins, talk a little bit about what drove you to seek public office and seek re-election, and then what you've been working on and what the opportunities are for Cheyenne.
Well, I think I come at it from definitely a different perspective than your other panelists, in that I'm not looking at a statewide venue. I'm looking at the capital city. I spent 12 years on the city council, retired from elected life, and was going to work for another 8 years in my small business, retire, and we were going to travel. And but when you're in a situation where the management of the city is at war with the legislature, the governor, the county, the city council, nothing's happening. Nothing positive was, going to be able to happen. And so I kept saying somebody needs to do something. And finally one day I said, I think I need to do something. And really what draws me to it is, I think, I've lived through the booms and busts we all have of the state of Wyoming. And, what could we do to diversify our economy in Southeast Wyoming to try to insulate ourselves a little bit from that? We don't have the luxury of having the mineral wealth that everybody else has. And so what can we do to do that? And, I think that was probably the biggest focus of what drew me to the office of being mayor. In my first term, though, I think I found a calling for trying to figure out a few of the issues that I think have become a statewide issue, like housing. And for us, it's a real challenge for finding water. 2/3 of our water comes from the Colorado River Compact, and we've got to figure out a way to find some new water resources, or we won't have enough water to about have 50% of what we need to run our city as we currently are constrained. So, I have a more narrow focus, but I really do appreciate hearing from the statewide focus you guys are bringing.
Yeah, actually, I think it would be good to talk with you and kind of open this up. The point of having this discussion was to talk about the opportunities that we see as leaders and the fact that there are a lot of things that we can change and we can work on. But there's this other side of it, which is the idea of risk. And I wanted to talk with you and start with you on this idea of what are the risks that you see as you focused in. I'm not sure that there's anyone in the state that I've talked to that knows more about housing in their community than you, and have really taken a deep dive into one topic. and maybe at the expense of others. And I want to talk a little bit about the risks that you're taking to go so deep into one subject matter and really, really hone in on it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I guess I hadn't thought of it as a risk, Josh, but for me, I think we have a unique opportunity right now in Southeast Wyoming. I've thought forever that we were the northern edge of the Front Range, and we would see, economic development start to push up our way. And since 2000, when I got elected to the city council, it just never happened, and there was always lots of reasons for that. But today, you can really feel it. You can see companies choosing to come to Cheyenne. We see data centers. We have 9 data center campuses that will actually actively be building. Starting around the 1st of March. We have so much going on. And if we're going to go ahead and continue to see those quality jobs come so that our children, grandchildren can choose to stay here in Wyoming, to have that opportunity, then we have to build the housing for them. It's just not going to happen. And, I really appreciate, Josh, you sending me that report that you sent the other day about the exodus of Wyoming young adults. And it came down to the number one thing that you learned was housing is one of those critical parts of that. And then when I talked to Eric and the guys from the Growth Lab, why can't we grow a workforce? They talked about housing. It's the number one reason that we're not able to build a workforce to be able to create the jobs that will diversify our economy and do that. So to me, it was just something we have to focus on. And not only do we have to focus on the market side, but also the service side, the people who are at what I would consider the affordable housing area. They're the folks we see every day in our work life. And if we don't figure out a way to find a place for them to live affordably, then we're not going to have the service industries that we need for the quality of life. And so for me, it's a problem we have to solve if we're going to grow and be successful. And I think our chances in Southeast Wyoming are huge. But if we don't get the housing done, and then your WCDA report came back saying we're 5,000 to 7,000 housing units short by 2030, it's huge for me. And then, one of the things I thought was really interesting was, we spend millions and billions of dollars educating our kids, K through 12, our community colleges, the university, and then we export them out. And we know what the reasons are. I mean, they want that downtown lifestyle. They want the housing. They're looking for restaurants and bars and experiences. But yet, from my perspective, we're not getting that support at the state level in order to be able to accomplish those goals. And so the risk is if we're going to continue to spend money and we don't start to invest some money in other ways to try to keep people here, that money is going to continually export great employees to other parts of the country.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with the logic that you've kind of developed there, and then that focus. I'm going to push on you a little bit though, because I think that you've kind of laid out the way that it's starting to turn out and the way that you've kind of focused on it. But if it's all right, can you talk a little bit about kind of some of the things that maybe when you started to look at housing, some of the risks you had to maybe take, and you'd mentioned that you work closely with your council, and so there are some things that you probably are thinking, there's no way I'm going to do this, or that the city will go for this, or that my voters will go for this, but maybe we got to do it, or hey, I'm not ready to do that one yet. Can you talk a little bit about the choices you're making and in some ways the risks that you're taking? And I appreciate that you don't see them as risk, that you see them as necessary, but I think that there's probably some of that calculus going on in your decisions, right?
Yeah, my meetings with the Growth Lab have been interesting. Eric and his team have really pushed us hard to look. And, at first you push back on those, it's like, well, I would never want to live in a town like that, or, his ideas. But the more you think about them, you realize if we don't do something different, nothing's going to change. And, so you ruminate on it a little bit, you start to read and you hear about successes that are happening in other communities, you think, well, maybe. And so you start working with your council, you start working with your community, and you take your first step and you have a success, you get it through. You see a builder start making a difference with it. It starts to encourage you a little bit, and then it makes it easier for the next step. And so we've been working on that for, 3 or 4 years now of, just trying those small incremental steps. The Growth Labs was the reason we have a problem in Wyoming is it's 100% regulatory. I think there's some truth to that, and we've spent a lot of time looking at the regulations, reducing regulations to try to encourage that. But I think equally, it's a lack of resources on our part to be able to put the infrastructure in that's necessary. Businesses that are developing homes are risk adverse, and they're not going to put a $20 or $30 million development together if there's not a guaranteed return on that investment. And so, how do we partner with them in order to do it? And so, those are the things that we're trying to put our minds around.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Rob, Creager, I want to jump to you now, if I could, and talk a little bit about the energy matching funds, and talk a little bit about some of those investments that the state is partnering in, and the risk that can represent.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the energy matching funds, for folks that don't know the history behind them, those were stood up about 3 years ago. If you think about what happened out in DC, there's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, understanding through that federal legislation that there'd be a lot of opportunity, and actually quite a bit of opportunity in the energy space. I think often when folks think about that bill, there's different political leanings towards it, but really some of the authors were folks like Senator Joe Manchin, right, who come from coal country, and folks like that. So there was a lot of opportunity in energy. So recognizing that, the legislature stood up the energy matching funds that are housed in the governor's office. It started at $100 million. After another bill passed out east, there was more opportunity for energy, so that's increased to $155 million. And really what that is intended to do is to help make sure some of these projects happen in the state of Wyoming. So the word matching is in it. So the private company has to come up with at least half, right? 50-50 match there for the project. That can come from either private sources or federal sources or both. But that is the minimum requirement. They submit concept papers to us as the WEA. We take a look at these, make sure their I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and then move those forward to a full application phase, which, Josh, as you're familiar with, sit on that review committee with myself, Randall from the governor's office, Holly Krupka from SCR, and Liz Gagan from Workforce Services to bring different perspectives to these proposals to see, is the technical feasibility there, is the workforce requirements, or is Wyoming willing to or ready to meet those, and those sort of things. And I think the highlight I like to show of that fund is shown, one, that there's a lot of demand for energy projects in the state of Wyoming, whether that be from fossil fuels or nuclear or renewables. We've seen a lot from all areas, and really been able to leverage some of those to have more benefits than just the project itself. I'd want to point to a project we've done with BWXT Advanced Technologies. It's a company out of Lynchburg, Virginia, that has made micro nuclear reactors for submarines for the Navy since the 1960s. We're working with them to figure out a way to put those on land for companies that want to use a nuclear power. And the first to raise their hand was really Trona, the Trona patch. The cool thing about that project is really the power is one thing, but we've been able to really expand to folks like L&H Industrial and Gillette, some companies in Casper, and even Hi-Vis down in Laramie, to provide some of that advanced manufacturing and building the components for these reactors. This has also spurred more excitement around our uranium patch and trying to make sure that it's sourced from hopefully Wyoming sources, but at least American sources in those reactors. So that all happened because of the Energy Matching Fund. Like I said, that company's in Virginia. I think you look around to other states like Virginia and Michigan and Texas, where I am right now, and Utah, they're all looking at standing up a quote unquote energy matching fund because they're seeing the type of projects that are coming to the state of Wyoming. We've been, like I mentioned earlier, we had that 50-50 match, but we've been able to far exceed that. Our second round of funding, we put out about $37.5 million, and we leveraged almost $130 million on top of that investment in Wyoming. So that's been exciting. Dollars are getting tight on that fund, but that's okay. I think there was a lot of, again, when the original fund was stood up, looking at federal funding. Now that some of that federal funding is changing or maybe gone, what's the right role of government, to your point, in this sort of this whole panel? I think that's a topic that we're going to have to wrestle with, because it is a good question. And I think in particular, when you look at companies, I won't name the bank, but a large investment bank in this country that we've talked with, they don't want anything to do with coal. Sometimes the federal government doesn't want anything to do with coal. So that leaves really us to help and partner with the coal community to try to, or coal companies to try to get these technologies moving and those sort of things. So really the matching fund has been that vehicle, and I think we've had some good success stories through it.
Hey, Rob, there are definitely some successes. So, what I would say is that I'm guessing that all of these are not going to be home runs, and that there's some risk involved. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I mean, this is a challenge that we face when we're deciding where funding should go. The safest bet isn't always the one that's going to take us into the future. So talk a little bit about that risk tolerance and how to balance it with what our goals are moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's super difficult because if you look at the future of energy, and sort of back to what I mentioned earlier of the different sources of energy that have really fueled this country and how that started to shift over the decades. For us, as you all know on this call, we're funded, the state's funded primarily by coal, oil, and gas. Those are the three main areas. From our perspective, that doesn't mean we don't look at things like nuclear or other forms of energy, because who knows down the line what kind of potential that could bring, and tie it to uranium, right? Look at their uranium resurgence in the state right now. So when you look at that quote unquote valley of death that a lot of companies run into, when we talk about something like point source carbon capture, throwing retrofitting a plant or building new plants with that technology, from our perspective, it's not really even a climate thing, right? I know some folks are either very concerned about emissions, some folks might not be. Our take on this is, what are the markets asking for that Wyoming has had for decades? And how can we make sure we keep those markets? So if that's, I'll use the state of Illinois. They actually take a lot of Wyoming coal. They also have a little different leanings on climate than we do. So what we try to do, and it is risky, I will admit, carbon capture is expensive. It needs to be proven up on a coal plant. But to our point is, if we don't invest in that, unfortunately, some of these states have already taken stances that they will move away. And we obviously don't want that to happen. So if we can essentially knock out the only concern they have with coal-fired generation, then I think we should do it. And that's kind of been our mindset with this fund going forward. And it's again, it is risky. We will not bat 1,000. I wish we would. But if I ran into any private business that bat 1,000, I would probably leave my job and go work for them. But that just doesn't happen. So we're in the same boat.
No, thanks. And I think it's a good perspective to understand risk, and then the risk of not taking the risk and trying to do that work to kind of square all of that up. So that's a really interesting perspective. Derek, I want to talk to you a little bit about, and you can choose if you want to talk on business council stuff, but you could also kind of provide your perspective on risk in the private sector, and you don't have to speak specifically about your company, but maybe just in the industry as a whole, to talk a little bit about risk.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great segue, and Rob, you kind of led into a lot of my thoughts, so I'm glad you opened the door for me on it. I think what we see a lot, especially in the natural resource space, especially around oil and gas, is there's enough uncertainty with what's subsurface that we really want to see as much certainty as we can at the surface. So having things in that business environment that are uncertain, unstable can be difficult. To Rob's earlier point regarding, our folks out to the east, there is some more certainty there. But what we have seen as an industry coming in, especially recently, we're seeing large effects to Powder River Basin oil and gas operators are from outside lawsuits being filed, in particular against the federal agencies. So currently there's one challenging the Converse County EIS that has effectively stopped any oil and gas permitting in Converse County. This isn't the first type. I was listening to the news and was even hearing, our neighbors to the south in Colorado, that Denver water is being held up from a reservoir expansion project due to a lawsuit basically under the exact same terms of, quote, insufficient environmental impact study. So I think what becomes difficult from a risk perspective is when you start piling different layers of risk on top of risk on top of risk. So really looking at what can we do to mitigate the risks we can control and then support those items that we can't. I also would absolutely agree with the idea of, when we're looking at markets for our products, it really is what the buyers want, not what our thoughts are, what we believe. And I think what's very telling of that is that everyone, especially a lot of our, what you'd consider a single product companies, so your oil and gas companies, your mining companies that were traditionally looking at what's their core industry, are all looking to diversification, whether it's, carbon capture, whether it's alternative forms of energy, whether you're looking at geothermal, the other more traditional, wind, solar, really looking at how do you diversify or how do you utilize your product internally. I know there's a lot of different thoughts around, how can oil field gas be used without even leaving the field? So really looking at how do we diversify in the companies, and I think from a state perspective, you have to look at it the same way. You have your core business, but if you're not looking at how do you move forward, how can you adapt for things, for markets and environments as they change, if you're not constantly adjusting? Because if you're not constantly adjusting your game of catch up, you'll be so far behind your competitors. Everyone's chasing technology. If you're not pursuing it, that gap just gets wider. So I think really that's a lot of the risk is tied to opportunity cost, was the old economic term for it, of what are you giving up by not chasing after it? And it is difficult because it does a lot of times challenge what's considered the status quo. And to the point brought up earlier, some of those status quos are things that are considered cultural. So it starts to cut kind of deep, which is very difficult. And to even think of, we have so many technical skills and so many technical trades that do an amazing job that sometimes it's even just difficult to change the wording. And that was, Patrick, you brought up the growth lab folks, that, something we talked about in a meeting was, it's materials handling is fundamentally what it is. And technical skills, but extracting the product and the identity tied to the product from that skill set is, I think, one of the bigger challenges. Speaking to risk, what's our risk if we don't find a way to decouple that? It's pretty large.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's some interesting thoughts. I like the way you kind of talked about the uncertainties that already exist in the subsurface, so you don't want to add more uncertainty on at the surface level, because that just compounds it. So that's a pretty interesting concept. I hadn't really thought about that before. Chairman Bear, I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit and kind of understand the way, as somebody who's going to be pretty key in the state's investments in our general fund dollars through appropriations. How do you view, or how do you think the committee will maybe view the idea of that risk versus reward versus investments and safety? And gosh, that's a lot that you're juggling around. So talk to me a little bit about your perspective there.
Well, first of all, I think the problem has been presented very well tonight by the panel. And I'm going to just put it in just a few words. The problem is that we have a lot of outside forces that are trying to determine our future. And one thing I learned by reading some Stephen Covey is that the more you focus on the things that you can change, the more influence you have. The more you focus on the things you can't change or out of your control, the less influence you have. And I believe Wyoming has a great opportunity to be very influential. And my ideas about risk, my ideas about direction, they have to do with being influential and influencing the states like Illinois around us that can use our products. And so that's a little bit, ethereal, what I just said, but I want to get into a little bit of the weeds of what we've been talking about. And specifically, I want to talk about the culture thing that I mentioned earlier. Derek just brought it up. And I want to take everybody back a little bit in history. When this country was founded, and this is a very special country in human history, there's nobody been freer than we have. And that's what's made our economy one that has virtually been unchallenged until we helped China challenge us. But what were the cultural problems that led to this nation being created? There was slavery and there was religious persecution. Two things that our founding fathers rejected as having to be the norm. And it led to civil war and other things. But ultimately, those founding fathers, and you can look in our documents that were of our founding, they found the slavery abhorrent, and they were definitely opposed to religious persecution. And so they took this country in a completely different direction, but they rejected the idea that culture would determine our future. And so when it comes to what the situation we're in now, where the culture has gotten a mindset, and I blame a lot of this on our education, has created a situation where carbon fuels are bad. Well, the reality is carbon fuels are inexpensive and they lead to a lot of great things that are part of our lives. And so we've got to decide that the culture is not going to determine our future. We're going to determine our future. And we can do that, I believe. And I brought this up initially at Renny's forum on the Wyoming Business Alliance forum this year at the governor's conference on business. And an idea that has crossed my mind is that Wyoming should be innovative in creating a culture where coal is used to create what we already know it can do very well and very inexpensively, and that's energy. We live in a time when this president that's coming in has promised to bring manufacturing back to the United States. I'm going to believe in that promise and assume that there's a good chance it's going to happen. And I think that Wyoming has got to create itself as a landing strip for some of those corporations. If we want to diversify, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more detail in just a moment, but if we really want to diversify, we need those manufacturing organizations to come into our state. We are going to have challenges. We're going to have challenges with workforce. We're going to have challenges with housing. But those are the things that good minds come together, and we can overcome those challenges. But I will tell you that there's no system in the world that can overcome those challenges better than a capitalist system that works on supply and demand. And the demand is going to be for low-cost energy. We see this with AI. We see this with the data centers that Mayor Collins is bringing into his community. And so low-cost energy. I love coal, oil, and gas. I love oil and gas, and oil and gas are going to be great for a lot of things. We have converted a lot of our power plants over to gas, but the problem is gas is more fluctuating in price by far than coal. And so we want a stable price. From the state perspective, we just want stable revenue, but that's the way we always look at coal. But really from a business perspective, you want to lower risk, lower the volatility of the price of cost of goods that you want to create a profitable opportunity, make it so that they can get low cost energy. So coal is clearly the lowest cost energy that's very reliable, but we have to overcome this cultural thing. So the idea that I presented at Renny's forum was that we should create an example that other states can look at and that will say, okay, that works. Let's try it too. And then we can create enough demand for coal to keep that industry going. And this idea is simply small coal-fired power plants with small grids to where those grids don't cross state lines. Now, this would be done simultaneously with the current grid and the current power sources, whether they're green energy, whether they're coal, oil, we already export well over 70% of our energy. We should continue to do that, but we should do it in a way that we should also simultaneously not create high cost energy for our residents, which we are seeing that with Rocky Mountain Power bringing several high, 30% or more increases to their ratepayers. If I were a manufacturer coming back to Wyoming and I read some of those headlines, I wouldn't be as interested in landing in Wyoming. We can overcome that, and by doing these microgrids that I mentioned that across state lines, I believe there's an opportunity, and I've asked Holly Kretka at the SER to help me look into this. Can we overcome the regulatory challenges that the federal government is going to try to put on us for doing this? And again, I think those regulatory challenges came out of a cultural mindset that says coal is dirty, coal is bad. We at the same time have to work on that. But I wanted to take just a moment and talk about diversifying. We have to be realistic about these things.
Representative Bear, can I apologize. I want to come back to the diversification thing.
That's okay. And I have to leave soon too, so
okay,
I apologize.
I want to give Renny just a quick chance.
Sure.
He has to leave at about 10 till. So maybe we'll go Renny, then go back to you for thoughts on diversification. And then I have a couple other questions for my panel, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your understanding. Renny, finally, for you, kind of bring this home if you can in terms of risk and what your members are saying and feeling, and talk to us a little bit about the risks your members are seeing.
Thanks so much, and yeah, I appreciate that, Chairman Barrett. As Derek said, it's nice to have younger people, and I have to pick up my daughter from her cello practice. So I got to run here in about 5 minutes. But just, yeah, such an important conversation because to me, I think there are so many risks out there, right? And we do have so many outside factors that impact Wyoming. Global prices of oil will affect the future of Wyoming. And also even make it hard for us, those impact natural gas prices, which impact coal prices. So there's all kinds of things out there that are so hard to control. And for me, I think I always look at an example like what Mayor Collins has done, and that is there's culture and then there's people, right? And so I think, Derek, what you were saying is above ground are the people. And so how do those folks come into play? Because we have a moment in Wyoming right now where we can innovate and really do some things and try to gain a competitive advantage, but it's going to be driven by private business and private money. So it's private money is, and I think what Chairman Bear is talking about, what Mayor Collins is dealing with, he's dealing with private housing developers who are looking to locate somewhere in the Rocky Mountain West and build. Chairman Bear's talking about somebody who wants to invest in power generation and probably something like data center because they want to build here rather than a nameless state that Rob is in right now. So how do we create an attitude where people want to be as nimble and innovative as possible who work in government? And like Mayor Collins kind of got there with some folks on housing, because the problems aren't going to be solved with laws. They're going to be solved with approaches to getting to yes. And when you walk in the door with an application for a housing permit or a permit to build a new coal-fired power plant, how's that going to be received, and how are the people going to be there so that they can respond to that and go, how can I help you do this best and make it as easy as possible to get there so that you want to invest more of your private dollars here? So that's kind of where I think there's a huge amount of opportunity for us. Is we need to lead in that area going forward, and I think that's what would be so impactful to our members, because we've done it in places. We've got a good track record of it in some areas, and we got to just continue to create that and support people who are ready to help the private sector get to yes, get stuff done, and do it as well as possible, because we're going to run into private property issues on housing with my backyard ends somewhere, and we're going to deal with the federal government at times. So we've got to be great at helping the private sector. So that's kind of what has me excited to be in this panel in this moment. So thank you all for letting me be a dad as well as a panelist tonight.
Yeah, well, thanks, Renny. And I think that's actually a much more important job than any other job. So I'm glad you're taking that very seriously. Renny, just to kind of put a point on that, I think there's a saying in investing and in money, and it says money flows where it's needed and it stays where it's appreciated. And I think that idea of getting to yes, how do we make it easier for those private businesses to operate and be able to start here, grow here, and stay here, I think is a really key point, and it's something we ought to think about. Chairman Bear, I would love to give you a couple minutes on. Thanks, Renny, for your time tonight. Thanks for being a good dad as well. And Chairman Bear, maybe we could talk a little bit about your ideas on diversification really quickly, and then go back to the remainder of the panel.
Yeah, and to wrap up the other part, what Renny said about getting to yes, and I know Derek probably got that in his salesmanship class as well. That's what the legislature needs to create, a framework, and I mean a legislative framework, where this kind of entrepreneurial effort, whether it's in power, whether it's in data centers, whatever it is, that the groundwork is laid for things to happen here easier than it is anywhere else. That's what's going to make the state of Wyoming competitive. Now, diversification, I just want to take you all through just a small math problem. Half of our revenues for the state come from coal, which means it's one of the largest minerals that we really produce, especially when you look at the low price of coal. So most of that comes from Derek and I's community here in Gillette and Campbell County, 13 mines we have here. And so if we look at just replacing the revenue from one coal mine shutting down, we would have to, based on our tax structure, minerals versus property taxes and sales taxes that we would get from an average sized business, the community of Gillette would have to have 330 average sized businesses to replace that coal business, that coal plant. To replace all 13 coal mines, if we just get real defeatist and say it's just going away, to produce the same kind of revenue for the state of Wyoming, Campbell County would have to have 5.5 million people. I don't want to live in Campbell County with 5.5 million people, but we need to take a holistic approach to diversification, because we need to understand how important is that coal, because if we walk away from it, that's half of our income for the state, and it would be difficult for the state to operate at the level it does now without that. So I want to protect coal. At the same time, we're working hard to diversify these other things. And to protect coal, I want to create an atmosphere where we sell coal both in the state as an example to the rest of the nation, and then promote it throughout the rest of the world. Thank you.
Yeah, Chairman Bear, I think that's really well said, is that we've got to embrace the word and think about how do we support both, so that we can, we deserve to have it all, and I think we could have it all. And so I think that kind of embracing the word and realizing that the importance of our natural resources is definitely a big key. And I'm glad to kind of hear that and see that moving forward. I think that's definitely something we've been working on. I want to really quickly, if we could, in the next few minutes, Rob, I want to turn it back to you a little bit and ask about some of these concepts of sort of like how does the Energy Authority help out with developing this idea of some really low cost power? I know that's part of your statute, I think, and that's something that you're working on. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the upside and the risk there?
Yeah, absolutely. It is. So, our statute puts us in charge of the state energy strategy. And really the two main things we look at when it relates to power is affordability and reliability. Those are the two things, because to the chairman's point, we have an abundance of a source that ticks both of those boxes. So where I think we can come in is really looking at these innovative ways, as the representative mentioned. It's kind of wild to me that in this state where we produce 12 times the amount of energy we consume, that we still have communities like where you live, Josh, that are power constrained. It makes no sense. And so I think, again, these ideas of these microgrids, while yes, frankly, it will upset probably some big players in the state that are used to having, certain power districts, but you know what? We should do that. We have an abundance, and I think we have communities that would be willing to use certain types of energy that maybe other ones won't. So I think that's where we can step in. If it's innovative, how can we collaborate, get the right people to the table to see My first thought is I believe that the city of Gillette actually has their own coal-fired power plant that they use, and let's see what they've done there that works, and can we make that smaller? Can we put that around other places? Can we look at things like micro nukes? Can we look, what makes sense for some of these communities that want and should frankly deserve a abundance of power at a low cost? So yeah, I'm excited to explore that idea even further, because I do think it has some merit, and I personally think that the structure that the state of Wyoming, as well as the West entirely, because our utility markets are much bigger than just Wyoming, I think you are going to see quite a bit of shakeup. I think you have state like Utah that's facing a lot of increases, and those places that just a lot of people asking why. And so I think we can step in and try to provide a Wyoming solution to not just Wyoming but further as well. So yeah, I think it's the microgrid idea has a lot of fruit to it, and yeah, that's where we can step in and help. I mean, we're quasi, so we can move pretty quick. A lot like the business council, I answer to a board of directors that are made up of industry, from coal to oil and gas to utilities, and I think again we got the right experts at the table. We just got to figure out how to make it work.
Yeah, thanks for that. And here's something that hits me, and just to kind of maybe put some thoughts to everything that the panelists have said today. We've talked a little bit about opportunities. We've talked a little bit about risks. And I think that what I heard from almost all of the panelists is that the risk that we actually face is that we need to take risks. If we don't, we're going to be in trouble. And I think we're going to be in more trouble if we don't take some risks. And here's something that I would say to all of us that are on the call, and maybe those folks that are listening that are leaders in their communities, at their organizations, or within their agencies. It's that we actually have the ability to make whatever changes we can. And I like this idea of thinking about and focusing on controlling what we can control. And if we think about the changes that Wyoming can make to set Wyoming up for the future, many of the folks are sitting here, many of the folks are in attendance, many of the folks are sitting in legislature and other agencies and companies. We have the ability to make those changes. We have the opportunity to make those changes. I think that the word can't shouldn't be in our vocabulary. I think we can say won't, or we could say we choose not to, but I really believe that we can and we should start to look at things and look at all of the things that are on the table, start to look at how do we make the changes that are necessary in Wyoming, and do it in a way that puts Wyoming first. And I think that's what I heard from all of us tonight, is that there are ways to do this, and that we're willing to put the work boots on and do the hard work to do that. And I think that from sitting here and listening to all of you talk about how we could do that, I got really excited about the future of Wyoming. I got really excited about the changes that could be created in the short and long term that will set us up for success. And so I just want to thank you, Rob. I want to thank you, Mayor Collins. I want to thank Derek Smith. I want to thank Chairman Bear, and I want to thank Renny at the Wyoming Business Alliance for sitting down, for talking through some of the challenges we face. And I would invite you anytime to come and talk a little bit with my board of directors and the folks that may be listening tonight to continue this, because I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think we have the right people in place to make some really big swings. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Eric and the rest of the board for attending. Thanks team for putting this together. And there will be a recording of this available, and we'll get it out to folks that might have missed. But thanks again, and we'll see many of you tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. for our regularly quarterly board meeting. Others of you will I'm sure tune in if you can, and see us make some more changes and more decisions that are going to help the state. So thank you all. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.